Okay, so we are going to roll right into the next session. Invite our panelists up to speak while I introduce the moderator of that panel, Dawn Martin. Dawn's president of CWEB. She's been in that position since 2004, and CWEB drives effective communication strategies on sound, sustainable ocean policy. Best well known for hosting the Seafood Summit. And I will say that that I have the pleasure and honor of having Dawn serve as the vice chair and treasurer of the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation. And so please let me invite the panelists up.
Well, thank you, Brian, who's quickly dashing off to fulfill all of the great accomplishments that he mentioned today during his speech, and thank you to Jason. I have to say that it's really quite impressive to have such high-level engagement by administration as we have had this year and this administration on ocean issues. Not only on this specific issue that we're going to get into today, but more broadly. And again, not only do we have a White House task force here with us, but throughout CHOW, we've had high-level representation, including the co-chairs of the task force that deal with illegal fishing and seafood fraud. Dr. Catherine Sullivan, the Undersecretary of Commerce for Oceans, as well as Kathy Novelli from Undersecretary of State Department for Oceans, were both with us on Tuesday evening at the gala and have been around and working within the community for many, many months and many long days to make sure that these efforts are moving forward as quickly and as effectively as possible. I also want to note Eileen Sobek, who is the Assistant Administrator for Fisheries in NOAA, has been acutely aware of these projects, advising, supporting, and helping ensure that all the agency's resources are moving as efficiently as possible to see progress. So in the interest of time, I want to just keep my introductory remarks quite brief, since it's not every day that I'm able to get the White House to do my job for me, which is sort of what Brian did. So thank you to Celeste and the rest of CEQ and the White House for being here and providing us with a great overview of the work of the committee over the past year in particular, since you were here last year in CHOW, and capturing where we have been and what the challenges are going forward. I might also add that it has been a real and distinct pleasure to work with this group and a privilege to get to know the members here. I've had the honor to be with them and see the progress that's been made over the last several months in particular, with a workshop, a panel, a briefing that were all conducted by this team at the Seafood Summit in New Orleans, followed by the announcement of the action plan at the Seafood Expo in Boston. They have been hitting the ground running. I don't know if they even recognize their families anymore, because I know I, for one, have been getting emails and phone calls 24/7, even though I don't respond to them all the time. I also know what it's like to work in government, having done that many, many years ago. And it's not always something that's well received when the White House comes down and says, this is a priority, we've got this work, we need you to do it, and you all have to come together and find the solutions. But I will say that what I've seen on this topic in particular has been an amazing amount of collaboration and personal interest, personal desire and passion around solving these issues, particularly by the people here and the co-chairs in State Department and in NOAA. So I want to just take a quick second to say thank you and ask you if you can all join with me on this important initiative. Thank you. So I'm happy to be here again, but I want to say that as I was leaving the house today, my daughter, who hasn't seen me very much today, this week, has said to me, Mama, is today the day you're dealing with the pirates? Here, this is my friendship bracelet. Can you give this to all your friends and say, stop the pirates to save the fish? So if you guys need a little friendship or good luck charm, she says, you guys will be able to do it. So I hope we are. I can't disappoint my daughter. So quick introductions. We have Russell F. Smith III, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for International Fisheries at NOAA, who's responsible for overseeing NOAA's work with other countries to ensure that fisheries are sustainably managed. Russell currently serves as the United States Federal Commissioner for 3 RFMO, Regional Fisheries Management Organizations. He's also serves as Dr. Sullivan's designee and helps lead the National Ocean Council, formerly known as the Presidential Taskforce, or PRINCE. Wow, did I say that? That really ages me. You guys know that? Just formerly known as, it just flows off the tongue. Anyway, sorry. So Russell's work is focused on enhancing seafood traceability and ensuring that enforcement officials have the tools they need to combat IUU fishing and seafood fraud. Next to Russell is Sally Yozel. Sally's a senior advisor to the Undersecretary for Economic Growth, Energy, and Environment at the State Department. She joined the State Department to support Secretary and past Senator John Kerry's Our Ocean Conference in June of last year, where the Presidential Taskforce on IUU seafood fraud and the expansion of the U.S. Pacific Remote Islands Marine National Monument were both announced. And you could certainly see Sally's fingerprints on both of those announcements. As Brian mentioned, the monument is the second largest marine protected area in the world, consisting of 370,000 square nautical miles and encompassing 7 islands and atolls in the Central Pacific Ocean. So Sally, you have some work to do to regain that #1 mantle from our friends in the UK. Sally also serves as the Undersecretary Kathy Novelli's designee on the National Ocean Council's Committee on IUU Fishing and Seafood Fraud. Great to have you here, Sally. Next to Sally is Alfred Nakatsuma, is the Director of the U.S. Agency for International Development's Regional Environment Office. He's responsible for USAID's regional programs in more than 20 countries on climate change, to counter wildlife trafficking, marine resource management, clean energy, science and technology, and the sustainable Mekong River Basin development. Sorry about that. USAID is the primary federal agency responsible for providing international development assistance, and fisheries management and IUU are important components of those programs. Alfred has been responsible for USAID's fisheries management programs in the Philippines and Indonesia, and now heads the Asia Regional Office based in Bangkok, Thailand. Thank you, Alfred. And finally, we have Peter Kafopoulos. Peter K, as I understand he's known as. He became the director of the Division of Seafood Safety at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration's Center for Food and Safety and Applied Nutrition just this past March. Prior to that, he had been the chief overseeing the Seafood HACCP group, where he served as the point of contact for the Deepwater Horizon oil spill and supported efforts during the Fukushima nuclear disaster. Peter also serves on the National Ocean Council Committee to combat IUU and seafood fraud, and he's worked on a variety of issues related to seafood safety, including new and updated guidance documents, import alerts, compliance safety guides, sampling initiatives, including new technologies around DNA testing, and various other mandates, including systems recognition work. So it's a great honor and privilege to have you all with us today. To start the discussion and to move into the questions from all of you, I encourage the online audience to submit their questions to #CHOW 2015. And to any of the rest of you who have questions, you all know the drill. The moderators are walking around the room and there's cards in your seats. But to get started, I wanted to say that I was trying to figure out if I could flip a coin, but it was hard to figure out who would go first here. So I said that on this panel, I've decided the ladies' first rule will rule. So I'd like to start with Sally. And since the State Department serves as a co-chair, Sally, overseeing the work of 14 federal agencies, and you've been actively involved in all the aspects of the work of the committee, I know that you could speak to a number of issues, but I wonder if you could speak specifically now to the areas where State Department is uniquely responsible, and maybe speak a bit to what the international community is seen of this work, what their expectations are, and the challenges you see in working with them. And then, of course, there's one thing in particular that State Department is uniquely involved with here from a policy perspective that I think is important to mention, and that's the Port State Measures Agreement. And if you could talk a little bit about where you see that process going, where we are, and when you'll have all that worked out for us. That would be great.
So thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Jason, the Sanctuary Foundation. Thank all of you for being here. I mean, I looked at the week and it was tremendous, so I know you're all still pretty jazzed. And let me just say that, you know, Brian did a great job giving an overview. He said we're laser focused. This is part of a large laser team, you might want to say. You know, listening to him, I was getting tired, but in reality, every day, what we're doing, I don't know about the rest of us, but I wake up really jazzed about it. I mean, you know, it is energizing to be part of this, and we're really making a lot of, we're doing a lot, and it's being very successful. And thanks to many, many of you here in the room. So keep us going, keep up the work. So that said, on the international, the IUU seafood fraud work, I mean, internationally, because we have been doing such a great job in the United States at really reducing the number of fish that have been overfished, and our management has improved, and it's been really a great domestic effort. So that is why the international piece on all of this is so key. I mean, you know, about 30% of our stocks are either overfished or close to overfished globally. And so what that means is that we have to globally get on top of making sure fisheries are well managed, and that the 90% of the seafood that comes into the United States, that it is legally caught, legally managed, and that we know it's, you know, we can trace it back and really make sure that that we understand its roots, so to speak. So that's what the task force is all about. So with regard to the international aspects, I mean, there are many, you know, whether it's the capacity building piece, the Port State Measures Agreement piece, whether it's working with embassies around the world and other governments, you know, the regional fishery management organizations. All of that is a piece that the State Department is working on, and working along with the colleagues throughout the government. We have to integrate data. We have to improve communications. We have to improve our marine domain awareness to the extent that we can share information about illegally caught seafood, and, you know, whether it's in marine protected areas or just IUU fishing overall. But focusing, if I could, for a minute on the Port State Measures Agreement. So this is a treaty that we are trying to get passed globally. We need 25 countries, to ratify. We have 11 countries who have already ratified, and so obviously we need 14 more. But what does it do? I mean, it's really all about creating this network of ports that have basic rules that are the designated ports where legally caught seafood, or all seafood, assuming legally caught seafood, has to come through these ports, so that we are sending, you know, a message that if you are out and want to sell your fish, it has to come through these ports globally, whether it's transshipped or caught directly. And this is for foreign vessels, so I need to make that clear. So it's the foreign vessels coming into ports around the country, the globe. So with that, our hope is that vessels that have illegally caught fish will not be able to access those ports. They won't be able to access the next port, or the next port, or the next port. And so that really will undermine their financial ability, and we will go from port to port to port, country to country to country, to try to prevent illegally caught fish coming into those ports, and then obviously into our country. With regard to the United States, so I am really pleased to hear, you know, the House and the Senate have what is called our implementing legislation. The Senate ratified the treaty last year, and now we have to do implementing legislation. The House and Senate have both marked up bills in their committees. We are waiting for it to soon go to the House and Senate floor. I would like to challenge members of Congress and their teams and their staff. Let's get it done before the July 4th recess. The two bills are this far apart, and it is going to send a message to the world. I mean, I want us to be, we must be, thank you. We must be one of those 25 nations in order to get this into effect. And I have to tell you that lastly is when we travel the world, when Secretary Kerry, when Undersecretary Novelli, we put this on our radar everywhere we go. And what we often hear from countries is, well, great, but what about you guys? So let's get rid of that dynamic in the dialogue and just move it forward. And then briefly, if I could, on the regional fishery management organizations. That's another part of our work. Best practices of the RFMOs. We have a group that is looking at, there's many, many RFMOs. Some are doing fantastic work, and we're trying to bundle together what are all the best practices, put it into a report that we can share to the RFMOs so they know what they can seek to move forward towards. So I'm going to cut it off there because I've got, I could talk about this for days, and I want Russell, who is the colleague that I travel most with. We are really a team working together on this. So let me just stop there. Thank you, Dawn. Sorry about that.
Thank you. No, I think perfect setup. So Russell, we'd love to hear from you on particularly NOAA's perspective on how it sees the top priorities for implementing the action plan. And more specifically, if you could speak a bit to the enforcement issues and capabilities to ensure that we're able to uphold the elements in the action plan and some of the issues that Sally touched on.
Sure. Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Jason. And thank you to the Sanctuary Foundation for this opportunity. And thanks to all of you for being here to hear this, and for those of you online for being interested in this issue. I think that, as Brian indicated, this is a very important issue for the administration. As Sally indicated, there's a lot of energy and a lot of passion about trying to solve these issues, trying to address these issues. And a lot of that's coming from the interest that we're getting, the support that we're getting from stakeholders, from fishers and others that are interested in this issue. Don, you mentioned the issue of enforcement, and that is one of the issues that was highlighted in the recommendations of the task force. Coupled with the two bills that Sally referenced with respect to implementing the Port State Measures Agreement, are some enforcement provisions. NOAA is very pleased that we are moving forward on the implementation of the Port State Measures Agreement. That is an important tool, both for us as leading the global community and putting in place these mechanisms to keep this product out of the markets that we depend on. But we also recognize that we need other tools. While we can stop product at the border, and that's what the Port State Measures Agreement is about and what those sorts of tools are about, we also need to be able to address product that has already crossed over the border. We don't have the resources to, we import 90% of our seafood. We don't have the resources to inspect everything at the border, and we need to have in place tools that will let us look at product once it enters into the border. And so what we are doing is reaching out to you, to members of Congress, to other stakeholders to talk about this issue, to talk about how do we bring into place the additional authorities that will really allow us to combat IUU fishing. Seafood fraud is another issue where we experience problems that happen once seafood is in our chain of commerce. We experience problems that we need the authority to inspect, to seize, to collect information so that we can identify and remove this product from the market. So that's one of the big focuses of our efforts. Another is actually being here and what's represented by the fact that we have the opportunity to reach out to the public, to have an exchange about what are the best ways to address these important issues. I think one of the things that we learned as we went through the process of preparing the recommendations, when we did a lot of public outreach through Federal Register notices and webinars and other public sessions with the public, is that there's a lot of information out there. There are a lot of people who've thought about these issues. And if we're going to be successful, we need to have a regular conversation. So thanks to Sanctuary Foundation and CHOW for giving us this opportunity. We intend to look for other opportunities, maybe as many as 3 public sessions a year, as well as setting up a website and looking for other ways in which we can improve upon the communication between the government and our and the stakeholders that are committed to helping us fight both IUU fishing and IUU fishing products in our markets, as well as seafood fraud. We also are looking to get information where it needs to be so that we can use it to keep this product out of our markets. So we can empower our enforcement officials to combat IUU fishing. So we have already started the process of working within the interagency community to better understand what our authorities are, what type of processes are already in play. But also we've been working to reach out to our state and local partners. Federal community on these issues is relatively small. Our borders, our coastline is very large. So we rely very heavily on our partnerships with other enforcement officials at the state and local level. So we've been spending time compiling and consulting with them on how do we better integrate our efforts. Finally, Brian talked a little bit about the work that has been done to start setting up the traceability system that was recommended, a system for tracing seafood from the point it's produced, from the point that it's harvested, to the point that it enters into the commerce in the United States. And again, I think as Brian mentioned, we have already done some outreach to the Federal Register. We will be doing more to try and engage you and get your views, get your input into how this program should be set up, how should we be collecting data, what data should we be collecting, how do we ensure that the data that we collect is useful to the enforcement officials. There's an interoperability with the data, we can communicate it to those that need it. I'm going to stop there. And
Great. Well, thank you very much. Now, speaking of your international partners, I'd like to turn to Alfred. And as USAID is the lead agency, it's a development agency, could you speak to a little bit about USAID's approach to working with our partners internationally, and maybe if you could touch on specifically some new projects that have come online, working in the islands like the Philippines and in Indonesia in particular, where I think there's been some good efforts to try to utilize the momentum around this action plan to start to build some new programs.
Sure, John. Thanks very much. It's a real pleasure to be here with all of you. It's not very often that people in the Foreign Service get a chance to come back to the States and explain a little bit about what we do. So thank you for the opportunity. It was really interesting to me to hear Jason say that there were questions, and they mainly revolved around gaps. I think Sally talked about the gap between domestic and international. I'd like to talk about the gap overseas between policy and implementation. I think that's a really important one. Over 50% of the seafood in international trade comes from developing countries, and 96% of the people who fish are small fishermen, the large majority of those from developing countries. Developing countries have a lot of problems, as you can imagine. There's extreme poverty, they're food insecure countries. They get hit by disasters and have a hard time struggling with that. There's a lot going on in these countries, and it's really tough, even if there's good policy, to make that work. These countries are, let's say, distracted because they've got a lot of existential things to deal with. Working with the governments that are responsible for carrying this out, you know, they're under-resourced, they're under-capacitated. When I worked in Indonesia, there were islands with people, the government had never set foot on those islands. It's a really tough thing to get implementation of this kind of policy to happen. Well, USAID, that's our job, one of our jobs, to work in situations like that to get this to happen. As you can imagine, it's really complex. There's national, provincial, regional, municipal, village-level governments in one direction, and in another direction, there's ministries of fisheries, ministries of environment, ministries of interior, ministry of trade, ministry of planning. There's a whole panoply, as in the United States, of government entities to work with to get implementation to happen. So USAID really tries to understand the context, understand the people that we work with, the governments as well as the people, and come up with the best technical program based mainly on capacity building, but offer it to them in a way that really creates the impetus for results. It's a hard thing to do. We expend a lot of effort customizing, building constituencies so that this implementation can happen. 4 basic approaches, Don, that we use. One is strengthening the government. There's no substitute for that. The governments across the board at different levels all need to be capacitated to carry out these kinds of interests. And it doesn't stop there. We also have to work with the private sector because even if the governments were really interested in doing this, you can't enforce your way into reducing or eliminating IUU. It has to be, to a certain degree, self-regulated. The private sector has to feel an incentive to participate in this. And if the private sector isn't involved, then these things don't work. Third thing we'd like to do is use, there is a case for the stick approach, and we work with the enforcement equation. There's investigation and apprehension and sentencing and a whole chain of activities that need to happen for enforcement really to take place. And the fourth general type of activity we do is awareness raising and creating the demand locally for governments to take action on these kinds of things. Because if the governments are not pushed by their own people, it makes it a really, really hard thing to get done. So those are the 4 general ways that we work. And if there's time, I can talk about just a couple examples.
Sure, that'd be great. But in the interest of time, we've had a lot of time focused on the IUU fishing side. I'd love to turn to Peter just for a second, if we can, to talk about the seafood fraud side and the role that FDA is playing actually in DNA testing and other techniques to be able to help resolve some of the issues on the fraud side of the equation.
Sure, Dawn. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting FDA to participate. And funny seeing Sally and other folks, colleagues here, because we run into each other now 2 or 3 times a week, it seems like, at various meetings and different groups and task force activities that we're working on. As you know, FDA is looking at this more from the food safety side of things. So we're bringing these different aspects to bear when we're looking at the various recommendations that have been put forth. So we're looking at the food safety and the science aspect. To deal with the seafood fraud, we're looking at seafood facility inspections. So when our investigators are in the field, they're doing that through normal inspections. We've all heard about how much seafood is being imported. So we have a vast presence at the different ports around the country. We're evaluating labeling and invoices and things like that to be able to figure out if the product should come into the country, be refused, be added to an import alert, for instance, where we can target and more appropriately hone resources to go after problem areas. We also follow up with the seafood fraud when it comes down to consumer complaints, industry complaints. So we have investigators that will work that aspect of it as well. The agency puts out the guidance for seafood naming. These principles are on the website, and they provide basic guidelines for folks to choose proper naming for seafood. And we rely on the seafood list, everyone does, to ensure consistency for the products that are out there. As part of our efforts to enhance visibility with information to get it out there to the public, consumers, industry, et cetera, and we all know government websites and the links are a mile long. So to make it a little bit easier, we did create the fda.gov/seafood. It's a basic website that you can type in and goes to a launching page. It has a lot of our basic information, the guidance documents, industry information, consumer information, research. We also have recently released information on proper labeling. So there's a 3-video series, web modules, if you will, that direct consumers, they have information for consumers, industry members, and state regulators on proper seafood labeling and what to look for out in the during inspections out in the field. On that page, though, is a great link where you can go to for our DNA testing. Over the last 4 or so years, we've drastically expanded our capabilities. So we have the technology that's been rolled out to our various field laboratories. And so when we find a problem in the field during inspections, we have the ability to collect samples and have them run for DNA testing and look for the information necessary to take enforcement actions. We have approximately 800 sequences, I believe, on the website now, and we keep expanding that. We're trying to expand to other types of seafood as well that'll help with our enforcement capabilities. And last, I just want to touch real quick, for the DNA testing, it lets us go and do field assessments. So we have focused sample assignments to go into products that are in interstate commerce, whether they be with distributors or wholesalers, and that way we can do spot checks and figure out where we might see problems, and then again focus resources a little bit better in those areas to go after those problem areas as we find them. We work closely with our other federal and state counterparts. So we've done cross-training with various agencies, federal and state, industry and academia on the DNA test methods, so that way it can be more widely used. And as everyone loves acronyms being in the government, so we have what we call FISH scale, our seafood compliance and labeling enforcement. That is our internal mechanism that we look at, where we collaborate with our science and researchers, our policy, and our compliance officers for taking cases and moving things forward, whether we move to an import alert, warning letter, seizure injunction, criminal prosecution, et cetera. We've got all these avenues in which to work through the process to try to combat seafood fraud.
Great, thank you. We have about 5 minutes left, and we have a stack of questions here that have already been answered, so thank you for predicting them or having your staff write them or something, I don't know. But a couple other issues themes that are coming through that we're finding here are efforts associated with the action plan for dealing with transshipment at sea. So I'll give you a chance to think about that, as well as synergies connected to wildlife trafficking, and where the opportunities for technology, innovative solutions on that end might be able to tie into the work of the action plan. And then finally, with the changes happening right now, or the attempted changes to Magnuson-Stevens Act, I wondered if you could speak a little bit to how that might affect the black market fishing and pirate fishing. But why don't we start with the transshipment issue, if we can?
So I'm happy to start. With regard to transshipment, I mean, when you think about it, and actually this, I can talk about wildlife as well, because they're all really linked. But when you think about transshipment, I mean, we're talking about trying to trace seafood from where it's caught to when it enters U.S. commerce. And transshipment is clearly a piece of that. And so that's what this traceability system is all about. Technology, I mean, this is the great thing. Technology in the food supply chain is really advanced. So we know we have the capacity to do that, but it's obviously a complex issue with having to work around the world to get countries and fishers and entities to the point where they're able to use that technology so that we can take that information and data in. As my boss, Kathy Novelli, likes to say, she was at Apple, as many of you know, the last part of technology is that last mile where you get it to actually be utilized. And we've seen a lot of great examples coming out of the private sector to do that. With regard to the wildlife piece, I mean, it's often, the bad apples and the bad players are bad in many things. And Brian said it, whether it's guns, drugs, wildlife, or illegal seafood. And through the Maritime Domain Awareness section of the recommendations that the Navy is leading with Homeland Security. In fact, they're having a meeting right now. Russell attended it earlier today. They are trying to figure that out. How do we share that kind of information around the globe with our Coast Guards, with their others' Coast Guards, navies around the world, Interpol. And again, technology will be the basis of all of that.
Great, thank you very much. And do you want to mention something about Magnuson?
Let me just, on the, yes, but on the transshipment issue, I think the other place that we're trying to deal with that is through the regional fisheries management organizations.
Very good point.
And the development of best practices. I mean, that's where much of the much of the infrastructure for managing on the high seas and EEZs is, and many of the RFMOs already have some, although not always adequate, rules on transshipment, so we need to think about how to improve them there. With respect to Magnuson, as you know, there is a discussion, debate going on about what needs to happen, and yes, our ability to manage global fisheries, to participate in global fisheries, and to make sure that we can keep our supply chain clean, that we can do things to encourage and help other countries, those that are supplying us, participate in this effort to sustainably manage their fisheries and to manage the supply chain it will be an important component of that discussion.
Okay, thank you. Using my prerogative as vice chair of the board, we'll have one last question, maybe extending past the 1-minute deadline we have left, that are issues related to public health. You do it all the time.
We have a conflict of interest policy.
Yeah, there we go. The question is really about the connections between some of the changes that are happening in the environment, what we're seeing in climate change, and how fisheries are changing, how we're finding new diseases in fisheries as they're being imported and exported into this country and around the world, and whether or not you see a tie between illegal fishing and fraudulent seafood to health concerns, and whether or not the government can in fact make any claims to trying to look at these issues from a human health perspective, both on the climate change side as well on the importing illegal seafood. There you go.
The short answer is not as yet. We continue to evaluate the information that's coming in. So we're looking at the science side of it. So we will look at the species that are coming in, look at anything that may be in the environment. Those are constantly being evaluated. I know there are other agencies in addition to FDA that look at animal health and the animals that are being imported themselves, for those that may be going into the water versus those that may just be a food safety. So those are being evaluated constantly and being assessed. So we are routinely looking at new test methods, enhancing our sampling capabilities and the science side of it to evaluate. Because in order for a firm, anyone here is familiar with the seafood hazard regulations, in order to perform a proper hazard analysis to figure out what hazards are out there, you have to know what species you're dealing with. So that's why this whole task force is so critical from our standpoint, is on the public health side, is you have to know what species you're dealing with to identify the proper hazard, to put in the proper controls, to protect the consumer. So those are the various aspects of things that we're looking at. But like what you mentioned, is we're constantly expanding the science side of it so that way we can try to be ahead of the curve on those topics.
It looks like a couple other people want to make some comments on mitigating human health concerns or impacts. And Jason's walking up, so spit it out quickly.
Okay, I'm just going to be really quick, and I'll let Russell be even quicker. The point is we don't 100% know, and obviously that's why we want to trace and get better information. I mean, if you're allergic to a certain seafood and it's labeled as something else and you don't know, then there could be potentially an issue. I'm going to just stop there.
And I guess the point I was going to make was that this enterprise, if we want to sustainably manage our seafood, if we want to ensure that it is healthy, really depends on science and data and information. And one of the things that IUU fishing does is it deprives us of this important data, this information that we could use to understand the impacts of climate, for example, on fisheries, that we could use to better manage our fisheries. So it's really important to the whole enterprise to combat IUU fishing, to get the data to adequately manage.
Excellent point. And I understand this panel is standing between you and Wolfgang Puck for lunch. So I will just, in closing, encourage you all to stay involved as you've been encouraged here by the panel. The process will continue. They've been very active on the road, meeting with groups and soliciting public comment and input. We want to be able to ensure that the work of this committee stays durable through the next administration, as Brian said. So that will happen only if you all stay involved and engaged and let your members of Congress as well as the administration know how important addressing this issue is for your company, your business, your organization, your communities. And I'm not going to stop so I can have one more second to say that I'd also like to thank not just the people that are up here on the panel, but the staff people within each agency, some out in the field who are working hard in the water, in the field, wherever, but that are day-to-day taking on new responsibilities to address these issues. They don't necessarily always hear how important it is from a Washington perspective, but on behalf of, I think, all of us here, I wanted to say thank you to all of them, and particularly to all of you. So thanks for your indulgence.
It goes without saying this panel could have gone on for another hour. CHOW itself could go on for another week or so with just touching on these issues that are so important to us and to the country and to the planet. We do break for lunch. We've got a short lunch by virtue of allowing this to go a little long. 3 options for lunch. Of course, you've got your blue ticket. Go grab a lunch, and if you don't go, you could purchase it at registration. But please visit our exhibit booths. And visit our bookstore, which has some nice discounts for you all. And otherwise, stay tuned to Capitol Hill Ocean Talk. They've got another great session. Brian Dees talked about the new nominations process that NOAA has been administering. We've got Tom Malata, who was here yesterday from the Great Lakes. We've got Joe Dunn, President and CEO of the Chesapeake Conservancy, talking about what the Chesapeake is doing by way of a new potential sanctuary within the bay. And so that should be a great discussion. Thanks again to everybody. We'll see you in 45 minutes at 1:15.
Hey guys, this is Matt McIntosh for the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries. I'm here on the Bayless. This is a sailboat, and it transports a skiff back and forth from San Francisco to the Gulf of the Farallones. For researchers, what they do is try to tag great white sharks, and the way they do that is they cut out of carpet a figure that looks like a seal. That piece of carpet also has a GoPro attached underneath it, and that way they can view the sharks that are coming up towards it. And it lays on top of the ocean.
But, back, shark up. But it's always good for us to get video of her as she's swimming around. We can get an idea if she has new scrapes or marks, things that may be indicative of what they're doing here.
That's it. Sign out. Hope you enjoyed. See ya.
We're lucky enough to be out here and to see a couple sharks. It's been great.